Today we're going to talk about underwater archaeology, also called maritime archaeology or marine archaeology. You can hear it called all three of those. It's a very specialized area of archaeology. It usually requires understanding of boat operations, ship operations, diving, training, knowledge of underwater technology procedures, sonar use, underwater survey, GPS, navigational technology, and that's just a start. Photographer here that you see, and I don't have a mouse, do I? Over here in the submersible. Can you see that screen? Yeah. Okay. Is Joe Hoyt. He's a maritime archaeologist with NOAA, NOAA's Office of National Marine Sanctuaries, and he specializes in the archaeological recording of deep water shipwrecks. Did you even know there was such an archaeologist? Well, you would. Okay, so who said that? So one of the reasons underwater archaeologists are so busy is because of a change that occurred between 8 and about 11,000 years ago in human history. So you have to ask yourself, why are so many coastal sites underwater? Because we're going to talk about coastal sites, not just battlefield sites. It's because we had at one time, 20,000 years ago, a gigantic ice cube laying over Canada and all the way down to Chicago. And eventually, as the planet warmed up and we moved into an interglacial, it melted, and that was a heck of a lot of water. As you can see here, the green area there is coastline 18,000 years ago. You can see England there, the shape inside. It was once connected to Europe, and it was like that all over the planet. There was a lot more coastline. Look at the coastline of California 18,000 years ago. Some places that's 100 miles or more out to sea is now underwater. And where it's underwater, there were human settlements, Native Americans. That's true all over Europe. Just about anywhere that there were humans, there were people once living on those coastlines. They're now all underwater. Breaking up of ice dams from melting glaciers is most likely the source of the many stories of catastrophic floods around the world. Our Old Testament is not the only religious source that has flood stories in it. It's very common in many religions. Around 8,000 years ago, the Storegga landslide from Norway caused a catastrophic tsunami that hit the east coast of Scotland. One of the possible triggers was melting glacier water dragging enormous volumes of sediment to the coastlines, and an earthquake then triggered the slide into the water. All this melting ice of the Ice Age covered coastlines around the world with sometimes hundreds of feet of water, and people were living in most of those places. Has anybody ever been up to the Drumhellers in Washington? No, there's a hand up there. What'd you think of it? Pretty interesting?
Yes.
Yeah. Are you a geologist at all?
Pardon?
Are you a geologist?
Oh, good. And I found out it didn't make this money, so I switched to electrical engineering.
That same is true of anthropologists too, yeah, and archaeologists. These are the Drumheller scablands, and if you look on a map, they're huge. And they are the result of probably the flood from the, I think it's the Missoula flood, and it was gigantic. It scoured thousands of miles of land ahead of it all the way to the sea, to the Pacific. And anybody that was there was gone. And there were very likely people there at 14,000 years ago. Now, the programs for the degree in marine archaeology, pretty specialized. There's not every university offers them. There's one in Southampton. I think there's one in Indiana, of all places. University of West Florida, this is their Luna project. Nottingham University. Several universities around the world have them. Denmark has one. And I think the University of Florida, the big one, has one of their own. In 1559, a Spanish explorer, Tristan de Luna y Arellano, moved north from Mexico to establish a settlement in Florida. A hurricane destroyed his ships and ruined food supplies. In 1992, one of his ships was discovered in Pensacola Bay, and the university has used it as a training area since then. So they are working on the Luna project, which is his ship, which was discovered. They need extensive underwater experience to pursue their careers. They should enroll in diving courses and become certified divers. Basic scuba equipment is the start. If you want to really be a deep diver or an experienced diver, that's just where you start, not where you end. They will use that in exploring shallow coastal waters of less than 30 feet in depth. We have areas with human settlements in it that are under several hundred feet of water, so scuba diving will not help you there. Many universities and museums involved in marine archaeology provide short courses in scuba diving, but world-class diving skills and several years of experience are needed for some work. The Mayan ruins at 160 feet depth offshore Belize is an example. Marine archaeologists have to understand the principles of modern geographical information systems and accompanying software applications. If you don't like technology or don't understand it, it's not a field you would move into. Coastal and subsea features change because of climate and geological effects. Precision navigation, including the ability to do dead reckoning, may be necessary. This is the USS Arizona. The National Park Service has their own archaeologists on staff, marine archaeologists on staff, who work at this site. And this is from Dave Conlon, who is a senior archaeologist there. He's standing on the starboard gunwale, is that how you pronounce it? Gunwale? Of the USS Arizona. In the middle is a picture of the ship, part of the ship. You can see it's very overgrown with some of the oil that leaks. The oil is sometimes called Tears of the Fallen. Has anyone heard that term? The Tears of the Fallen. So it's ROV trips have been made into the ship to evaluate opportunities for preservation. That is on YouTube if you ever want to see it. And one of the things the ROV saw was, strangely enough, still on the hangar, a jacket, a uniform jacket, hanging in the water from a bar, still there. He says, as an underwater archaeologist for the National Park Service, it is my duty and honor to help preserve and protect the remains of the USS Arizona and its crew. Almost every year since 2000, I have had the privilege of diving on a site that few others can access. It is not a free diving or open access area. But what is it like to dive on Arizona? Confusing, disorienting, sad, and uplifting. Visibility in Pearl Harbor is rarely good and often bad. You are exploring a 600-foot-long, 100-feet-wide battleship in a sphere of visibility that's about 12 feet in diameter. The site is heavily overgrown with sponges, corals, and other marine life, with a color palette of olive and muddy brown, as muted as the visitors to the memorial. Corners and edges, once polished and painted in navy gray, are rounded, bent, cut by salvage teams, or shattered by blast and fire. Here, gradually, the somber sense of place begins to sink in as a dull, slow realization of tragedy. Your mood is pulled along a declining spectrum from normalcy to sadness as you see areas where fish have cleared the teak decking to lay their eggs or a bit of new coral growth, and then suddenly a sailor's shaving kit or a cereal bowl appears in the galley area. And that's his post. Torpedo Junction, Battle of the Atlantic. I'd heard the term. I will admit I didn't know much about it. Some of you probably know a lot more than I do about the Battle of the Atlantic. I was not aware that there are 4 or 5 U-boats scuttled off the coast of North Carolina. In January, from January to about July of 1942, because we were in so much disarray because of the attack in the Pacific, we really were not prepared for an attack on our eastern shores, and the Germans took advantage of that. A number of U-boats prowled up and down the eastern coast almost without opposition. And in fact, between February and May, they sank 24 ships off of Florida, 16 of them from Cape Canaveral to Boca Raton. For weeks, as people died, the Navy failed to act or give directions to commanders asking for assistance and guidance. This is the Navy upper echelons. The delay was partly due to concerns in the Pacific theater. Further, the newspapers agreed to censorship, so the public was left unaware of this attack. So nearly 400 ships were sank, and 5,000 people lost their lives. That's more than at Pearl Harbor. Finally, in April, the U.S. had a plan and a fleet of 65 anti-submarine vessels. At the end of the month, all tankers were ordered into port. No tankers hauled oil around the Atlantic Ocean unless they had escorts. From then on, most merchant ships traveled and escorted many convoys known as bucket brigades along the coast. Do we have any Navy people here? At night, merchant ships put into sheltered harbors. The Civil Air Patrol began sorties. It's very interesting to read about the Civil Air Patrol. I mean, they literally had no one to go out and look for them. So they enlisted the Civil Air Patrol to go up and look, to try to find submarines. And none of this story's really been told very, very well, has it? Pilots and small privately owned aircraft patrolled the coast from bases stretching from Trenton, Maine to Lantana, Florida. Though they weren't effective at sinking U-boats, the little planes prevented attacks by spotting U-boats. 4 U-boats, U-576, U-85, U-352, and U-701 were sunk and are off the coast of North Carolina. 2, U-71 and U-123 were scuttled elsewhere, not sunk in battle. Hartigan, captain of the U-123, died this year at 105. So there we see the Dixie Arrow being attacked and torpedoed by U-71. There we see the USS YP-389 sunk by 701, June 19th, and less than a month later, it was the turn of U-701 to go down, and it did. SS Empire Gem, that's at by the way, that YP ship is at about 600 feet. The SS Empire Gem, January 24, 1942, sunk off Hatteras, North Carolina, by U-66, which in turn was sunk in 1944 near the Azores. So it was an interesting time, to say the least, and most of us are not aware of all of this activity off of North Carolina. Yes?
One thing, Bonnie, was in the first couple of months of the war, they did not have a blackout.
Right.
And so the U-boats would surface, and the ships would perfectly outline at night with the city lights in their background, so that,
you could see them easily.
Shooting.
Mm-hmm. Right, and because the news was censored, nobody was telling these ships this was happening, except one another. And they finally realized they had to do something. It was the head of the Navy, not the local commanders. The local commanders were begging for instructions to do something.
Another thing was the U.S. Navy did not want to do convoys. The British had been doing it in the First World War and for all going on
Successfully.
But they didn't want to do it because they wanted to be hunter-killer groups looking for subs, but they didn't realize the subs are looking for ships. If you got a bunch of them together, they're at least going to come there.
Mm-hmm. And then you can get them. Yeah. In fact, a very interesting book I found, you may have read it or heard about it, Torpedo Junction, U-Boat War off of America's East Coast by H. Hicks. It's a very well-read book, a very popular book. This is the Monitor National Marine Sanctuary off of North Carolina for all these battlefield sites. These are all, see the little dots there, which you can't see too well? Those are all battlefield sites, wrecks, planes, ships. The Monitor National Marine Sanctuary is actually named after the iron ship Monitor from the Civil War. So you can go, there's a museum there for you to go see. You can buy books on the subject, videos on the subject there in North Carolina. And I was kind of embarrassed because I didn't know about all this. So it was interesting when I came across it. This is diving the wreck of the U-701 at 115 feet. That's a very experienced diver. Diver documenting the Atlas torpedoed by U-552 in 1942. It's at 120 feet. The U-552 survived to be scuttled by the Germans in May 1945 off German shores in the North Sea. It was a last-ditch effort to prevent Allies from getting there. There's the conning tower of U-Boat 352, and there's the map of the Monitor Sanctuary. And this is all maintained by NOAA. So it's very interesting. You can go on their site. You'll see all kinds of material. Yes?
I have a question. It says Monitor National Marine Sanctuary. Is this the Monitor from the Civil War?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Because it's there.
Going on World War II and ignoring.
No, I said that remark. You just didn't hear it earlier. I did say it. You just, maybe I just didn't speak correctly. But I did mention it was the Monitor from the Civil War. Okay, this is U-5. This is from the first slide, U-576 and Bluefields. They were looking for them for a long time. And finally they started in the summer of 2011. And that's the archaeologist, the marine archaeologist we saw who works for NOAA, Joe Hoyt. He orchestrated the first hunt for U-576 and Bluefields starting 2011. There is a constant frenzy of activity from the time I roll out of my rack in the morning until, salt-caked and tired, I crawl back in late at night. Daily mission briefs, personnel transfers, coordinating submersible rotations, assigning objectives, launching subs, downloading and processing data, reconfiguring survey equipment. It's very easy to get so caught up in the mechanics of executing the day-to-day activities of a mission that you miss the wonderment of where you are. With searches going since 2011, Bluefields was tentatively located in 2013, and U-576 was located not far away in 2014. NOAA and associated agencies launched an expedition to examine the ship. I think this is a great shot. Can you, it's a little faint, can you see? You can see both the U-boat and Bluefields. And the reason they consider this significant is they represent the physical remains of the only World War II naval battlefield off the east coast of the U.S. where both the aggressor and its victim are present. So it's now on the National Register of Historic Places. And they have managed to, with specialized equipment, done a 3D resolution of the U-boat. Looks exactly as you would expect it to. It's really, I'm always so impressed when I see this, all green, but you can see what's there. You can see the enemy and the victim all in one picture. Interestingly enough, the man that I mentioned earlier that just died at 105, he came over, he became very wealthy after the war. He came over, I think he served 10 years maybe. I can't remember if that's the one or if it was, maybe it was Donuts, Admiral Donuts that served at the time. He came over to the U.S. and he met some of the men involved in the fights that he had been involved in, and they became friends. So that's what it said. This is underwater technology. It's pretty remarkable. This is new technology. That is a very, very clear picture for an underwater picture. That was developed in 2013, and they're trying to make it even better. This was at Isle Royale National Park in Lake Superior. It's a prototype multi-camera photogrammetry system designed by Marine Imaging Technologies to create 3D models of the Isle Royale shipwrecks. And there are a lot of wrecks in Lake Superior. This is a 3D optical model of the Corsair, a World War II military plane that sets at 115 feet in Hawaii. The plane ran out of fuel during a routine mission in 1948. And this is done by Advanced Imaging and Visualization Laboratory. And this is what they're working on, 3D imaging, so that they can really see what's going on underwater. So as with other technology, refinements to underwater research technology occur constantly. It tends to be expensive, and it's more limited in availability. To get around this, it is common for more than one discipline to go along on an expedition. Thus, biologists, geographers, geologists, and maritime archaeologists often combine studies using equipment, sonar, automated underwater vehicle, and ROVs. The ROVs we've seen, the difference between them and an AUV is that the ROV is tethered. So, and they also use human-driven submersibles and 3D imaging. The very idea of getting into a submersible and driving around looking at a ship underwater is just horrifying to me. But I am so glad there are people with the, what do you say, cojones to do it. I would have no images at all here otherwise. This is Stellwagen Bank National Marine Sanctuary in Massachusetts Bay. Frank A. Palmer and Louise Crary, those ships were coal carriers, collided in 1902 during a gale, depth of about 350 plus feet, rediscovered in 2002. So they've been using ROVs to go down and study them. This is the Palmer Hole, home for anemones. Steamship Portland down in a massive blizzard gale in 1898. Death toll around 200. It's at 400 plus feet. Deep divers and ROVs have investigated, and it was rediscovered in 1989. And this is the galley. Over here's the dishes and cookware from the Portland galley. This is a deep diver. This is really specialized, and there are not a lot of people who can do that. Many people who have tried to set records have died and never been found again. But they have gone to 1,000 feet. And it requires a special air mix and a lot of training. You can see the kind of tanks they're carrying, quite unusual. Current accepted depth record is 1,000 feet. And the Guinness Book stopped publishing these depth records. Why would they do that? Because people kept dying to try and go deeper. Does anybody find that attractive? Going down 1,000 feet? No. Okay, now I practice saying this. Papa Hana Umokua Kia. And it's named after two Hawaiian deities stuck together. But that's another marine national monument off near Hawaii, and NOAA also monitors and helps run that one. And the NOAA maritime archaeologist is a woman here, Dr. Kelly Gleason. She records a broken cylinder head at the site of Brewster F2A3 Buffalo, wrecked at Midway Atoll in February of 1942. And this looked like so much fun. Now that I would do, being towed along underwater. It's not very deep, it looks like, but he's a marine archaeologist being towed along to look for shipwrecks. That seems like fun, doesn't it? Sort of. But you know me, I would run into a shark or something and I would completely fall apart. I'm such a coward. Okay, this is a NOAA archaeologist documenting aircraft remnant from the Battle of Midway. And this is a filming close-up of the USS Macaw, which hit a reef in March 1944. It's pretty interesting, marine archaeology. They use stories passed down through generations, because often mythology and your stories about what happened to your gods and goddesses may have grains of truth of something that happened 1,000 years ago. They also use written records, archival material, the discovery of shipwreck sites to get a glimpse of what life at sea and the ocean environment was like for our ancestors. The many layers of heritage in Papa, Hana, Umokua, Kia have left a material legacy on the seafloor and a wealth of history to interpret. We see the material remains of American and British whaling ships, Japanese junks, Navy steamers, Hawaiian fishing sampans, Pacific colliers, salvage vessels, and Navy aircraft. It is a marine national monument. It includes 583,000 square miles of ocean, 10 islands and atolls of the northwestern Hawaiian Islands, and is considered important for its biological bounty as well as its Hawaiian cultural and World War II sites. Now, I love the fact that she can write underwater with this terrific equipment they have. And she's probably about as deep as I would be willing to go. Florida, the Osceola River. Does anybody know the Osceola River at all? It runs from Georgia to, right now it's underwater, more water I'm sure, but it runs from Georgia down to the Atlantic there, to the sea. And it is a very historic river because it covers what used to be open land. And people were living there 8,000 to 13,000 years ago. This is Professor Neil Puckett, diving Osceola. And by the way, there's another one there, the Wasissa. And both of them have alligators in patches. I'm not diving where there's alligators. Anyway, this is recently, 2016, found a mastodon bone associated with stone tools, dating to approximately 14,550 years ago, partly dated by pollen, by dung, what you find in the dung, and the layers above and below the artifacts. So it's from the Page-Ladson Archaeological Site, which does have its own site on Google. It was under 20 feet of water and sediment. These early dates reported in the 80s and 90s were challenged and controversial, and we know why. If you've been to my classes, you know it was the Clovis people who said it's not possible for anybody to be in the United States 14,000 years ago, so drop it. Well, now those dates have been confirmed. So based on this site and others, more underwater searches are urged. I suspect there are no alligators where they're working, which is a good thing. Because even though they don't look tasty, I don't think that makes a difference to alligators. So this is something that was also found by the woman who's the head marine archaeologist there, 2016. It's part of a knife found. This is the in situ place, the photo of it. And you can see they have measurements next to it. They do not move it until they have tested the sediment, until they have taken photographs from every angle you can think of. And there's a number of other tests that they will run before they actually move that up out of the sediment. During the Paleo-Indian period, the climate in Florida was cooler. Sea levels were lower, and a greater section of the land mass was above water. With the change in climate, in fact, this was probably where it is now, it's 21 feet below. It probably was, when it was dropped there, probably 8 feet above sea, above, it was an 8-foot area of land. So it's dropped almost 30 feet. With the change in climate, sea levels rose and limestone aquifers filled with fresh water bubbling from sinkholes. The rivers also covered the Paleo-Indian camps where captured animals were butchered. In recent years, archaeologists have found tools and bones dating back thousands of years. So the Osceola is a very productive area. Archaeologists do work there frequently and have worked there for many years. More on the Osceola River. You can see the red star is where land used to be. That's now all underwater. 160 meters at the edge, which is what is that, almost 500 feet? Something like that, below water now. The blue star is the Page Ladson site on the Oscilla, which was once far inland and now is underwater at the Oscilla and nowhere close to land. All of that used to be land. It's all gone now. So there's a lot of Indian, Native American material there. It's just getting to it. She says she is one of the only a few dozen who focus on landscapes. There's a lot of battlefield marine archaeologists that get covered by the sea or prehistoric settlements that were terrestrial but ended up underwater. So she's kind of a specialist in her marine area. And I thought this was interesting. This was from her 2016 journal article. Underwater excavation was conducted by archaeologists trained in scuba using trowels and a water dredge. Excavations occurred in 5 or 10 centimeter levels. What is 10 centimeters? Something like that? With all sediments sieved on the water surface through nested 1/4 inch and 16 inch. So they were keeping the graduate students busy because they are only going like that far down for each level. And they have to go through feet of this stuff. But each level, they're marking it, what they've got, where it came from, how deep it was, and then they record all that. Locations of stratigraphic boundaries, artifacts, and bones larger than 2 centimeters, which is pretty tiny, were recorded during excavation. No wonder it takes them so long to find anything. Spatial locations of all artifacts and samples were obtained from underwater laser control points set by Total Station on land. Radiocarbon samples were collected in situ during excavation from freshly cleaned profiles and from cores. Carbon-14 measurements were determined at the W.M. Keck Carbon Cycle Accelerator Mass Spectrometry Laboratory, UC Irvine. So, as she noted in an interview, Canada was covered in ice 14,500 years ago. So if people came from the east, came into the east, they would have come, all right, it was late. So if people came from the west, they most likely came by boat down the west coast and then across. Any other suggestions you have about how people got to Florida 14,000 years ago are welcome. Because nobody really knows. And how did they get down to Chile 14,000 years ago? Or maybe longer than that.
They walk.
Yeah, it was a long walk. Most likely it was by canoe through the kelp forests. Because those kelp forests are incredibly productive and they used to go down the entire western coast of America. So this area was populated with mastodon, giant ground sloth, saber-toothed cats, and associated ice age fauna. And they have alligators. I'm not getting in the water. So the Minnesota Offshore Archaeological Site, the only reason I thought it was interesting is because it was something new. They just discovered this. It is a burial that is under, I think it's under 8 feet of water. Was it? Oh, 21 feet of water. But it was once a freshwater pond, which at that time when they were buried was 9 feet above sea level at the time. So there's grad students sifting. That's what they have them doing all the time. But at least they're doing it in Florida. So that's not, I mean, it could be worse. They could be doing it somewhere dry and dusty. This is measuring and writing underwater. And this is, you can barely see it, but there's a little laser measurement line coming out of that equipment up there. Underwater, they use a lot of technological equipment. So complications and expenses arise when a site contains human remains. You have to notify the local Native Americans, and in this case, Seminoles. Funds and workers have to be drafted from numerous agencies. You have so many hoops to jump through. The Florida Bureau of Archaeology worked with Florida Gulf Coast University, Southeast Archaeological Center, Florida Public Archaeology Network, they provided the research vessel. Sarasota County Historical Resources pitched in. NOAA provided remote sensing equipment. Bureau of Ocean Energy Management provided logistical assistance. Florida Fish and Wildlife, Sarasota County Sheriff, and the Gulf Coast Community Foundation all worked together. Why would you need the sheriff there?
Valuables.
Well, you have to keep people from diving it. They will. Once you know that it's a burial ground, it becomes a non-diving area. And you have to keep people away from it. So,
Well, the sheriff could also help you kill any gators that float over.
do they have them out there in the seawater? Ew.
They'd be there.
Ooh.
They're insulting.
No. They scare me. What can I say? They had a forensic anthropologist to identify the remains found, and I think it was a female. But this is new, so we don't have a lot of publication on it yet. Lake Huron. Anthropologists know, and archaeologists know, what Native American hunting drive lanes looked like. They're well recognized, well documented. They've been seen for decades. Everybody knows what they are. This one's underwater, and they found it by sonar scanning. And the rocks dropped for a drive lane were 26 feet wide and 98 feet long, which is a heck of a lot of work for people who didn't have horses or wheels or anything like that. They had large boulders placed for hunting blinds along the way. Most likely some hunters were stationed along the drive to move the caribou forward by shouting. This used to be the green part, or the brown part is what's today. The green area was once exposed land, and that's where that drive is. That's all now underwater, but it wasn't 11,000 to 7,000 years ago. And it was 328 feet lower than presently. So they must have seen something that made them look. Somebody did some sonar work and asked what it was. Somebody recognized that it was a Native American drive area for the caribou of the time. That was published in 2014. And it's actually available if you want to read it. It's pretty technical. A 9,000-year-old caribou hunting structure beneath Lake Huron. Have they found Captain Cook's Endeavour? I thought this was interesting. I hadn't even thought about what might have happened to his ship. I mean, he didn't have a happy ending. It was launched in 1764 as the 368-ton collier Earl of Pembroke, bought by the British Royal Navy for Cook's scientific mission to the Pacific Ocean and named Endeavour, sold again to private investors in 1775, renamed the Lord Sandwich. She became part of American history as well as Australian and British history during the Revolutionary War, when an invading French fleet approached Newport in 1778 in support of the American side. The Lord Sandwich and 12 other ships were scuttled to block the harbor. This is from the University of Massachusetts website. 20th and 21st century archival research eventually determined that the Lord Sandwich was most likely Endeavour and now in the sea at Newport. The likely location is Goat Island in Newport Harbor, where 5 of the other ships were sunk, and investigation is ongoing. What's interesting is they have a huge, big landfill there by Goat Island, and I always wonder, I mean, where they've been dumping trash, and I always wonder, I wonder if the ship is under that now. But they believe it's one of those where the 5 symbols are up there. They believe it's up there, and they believe it will be the largest one. And they're working with Australians because Cook, I think, what did he discover? The north coast of Australia, the east coast of Australia, something?
The Great Barrier Reef,
Okay.
Hawaiian Islands.
Well, no, that's where he died. And when I read about it, it was kind of stupid. He tried to kidnap the king. They didn't like that. You don't do that. Captain Pollard gets the message. I don't like whaling ship stuff anyway, so I'm always glad when they sink. Every time I watch Moby Dick, and I always watch the old one with Gregory Peck, I feel good, happy that it sunk, and I'm sad, only sad for the cabin boy. He's, you know, poor little thing, he's like 10. What is he, about 10 or 12? This is a tripod used for extracting oil from blubber, and they are examining the remnants of the two brothers. And this is off of near Hawaii, the French frigate Shoals. Does anybody know that area? And why is he so important? It was because he was the captain of the Essex, a whaling ship sunk in the South Pacific by a gigantic sperm whale they believe was up to 85 feet. This very large sperm whale. He and some of his crew evacuated to some of the remaining small whale boats, only to face severe hardships, including cannibalism. He actually agreed to the shooting of his young cousin, Owen Coffin, as a sacrifice for food. In fact, his sister had given this young man to him, and she specifically said, take care of him on the ship. But he got eaten. Somehow, after this, they made it back. Somehow he managed to become captain of the two brothers, which he sunk at French frigate Shoals, and he ended his life as a night watchman because I don't think anybody else was going to give him a ship. Any guesses as to the famous novel that was inspired by the sinking of the Essex? So, poor Captain Pollard, he had, what would you call that kind of luck? Being sunk by the largest sperm whale anybody's ever heard about, and then hitting 2 years later and eating your cousin, and then 2 or 3 years later you're such a bad captain that you hit a shoal. Of course, they probably didn't have good records, but still. This was interesting to me, a slice of Byzantine life. This was actually found, I think, in the 60s, and it's a ship full of 150 tons. And this is a long time ago to be carrying that much weight, of pre-worked stone. Sank in a storm in 25 feet of water off of Sicily 1,500 years ago. So first they thought maybe it was destined for one of the many churches built by Justinian I, and this is one of his churches, quite beautiful, isn't it? That's a church in Ravenna. But work has been ongoing modernly with Stanford and Naples University using modern techniques, including 3D reconstructions, and they think that because the art and the working of the stone is a bit dated, quote unquote, for Justinian's work, they think it might be some client, a wealthy person outside the emperor's circle. But it's still interesting. I was just fascinated that they could carry that kind of weight 1,500 years ago. Underwater. Yeah. Underwater Archaeology Europe. This guy's using a manual data logger with sediment profiler. Do not ask me what that means. But these are some pictures they took. They got a little 10,000 euro award, Denmark did, for their project. And it included researchers from 7 countries that came together to improve the state of marine archaeology and conservation. The UK and the US are probably ahead of them for that kind of thing. National Museum of Denmark coordinated the team, worked on the development of new methodologies, and they also worked on the Roman town of Baia in Italy and a little Greek town. This is kind of interesting to me because you have to know what you're doing, how to do it, to measure that sediment and get the right information. And then once you get it, what are you looking for? Are you looking for like pieces of stone? Are you looking for building materials? Are you looking for wood that someone might have, a ship that was there? I don't know what they're looking for, but it'd be interesting to see. Underwater Archaeology Finland. I found this a little remarkable, and I think whoever wrote the article may have misunderstood. They found a Neolithic building under Lake Kuolimo, and they're just astounded. They were working with archaeologists in Sweden and Denmark, working to preserve it. and analyze it. And this is the hearth, and they've gotten a lot of tools out of there that they found. This unique discovery is the first of its kind in Finland. Until now, similar sites closest to Finland could only be found in northwest Russia and southern Scandinavia, and this opens up a new avenue of research in Finland. I have a question. Everybody else around the world is looking underwater for these Neolithic settlements and early settlements. Why is this an amazing fact to the Finns? I don't know. I hope nobody here is Finnish. But I thought it was kind of interesting. They never thought to look before. They never checked how deep that lake was 10,000 years ago. I mean, if they have enough, they have an archaeological department, and apparently they have some marine archaeologists. Why weren't they looking before this? Everybody else has been looking for decades. Oh, well, maybe they, I don't know, is there beer in Finland? Is that what it is?
It's too cold.
Is it too cold? Yeah. Okay, this is the next one, November 8th, the future of archaeology. I think you can tell the future is going to be really technological. If you remember, I think the last time we talked about aerial, and in just one LiDAR trip, the Mayan city of Karakol grew to 70 square miles from the known excavated 9 square miles. With that new knowledge, the understanding of the scale, population, and advanced engineering and architecture of Mayan city-states grew. They had no clue, really, how big this. They had been working 25 years with little trowels, digging up the city, 9 square miles after 25 years. So the LiDAR says you've got another 150 years worth of work to do if you're going to use a trowel. But this really expands knowledge tremendously. Even if you never take a trowel to the rest of it, you can see that it's there. You can see how complicated it was. You can see the networks, the roads that were beautifully built and were raised. Suddenly you have information you didn't have before. In 1817, an early pioneer, look what I did, I blocked it, okay, it was up late again, set out to explore the Great Pyramid. He didn't just want information, he wanted treasure, and used dynamite to blast holes in it. Can we go back and shoot him? Damaging the pyramid. Recently, specialists in scanning were able to discover a 100-foot space inside using a non-invasive particle physics-based technique called muon tomography. Is anybody familiar with that stuff?
1817, the guy that invented dynamite wasn't born until 1833.
I don't know what he did. I don't know how that happened. I'm just reporting what's reported. So maybe there was some other explosive he was using?
Black powder.
Black powder from guns? And somebody translated this and translated it wrong? Could be.
It wasn't as smart as our OLLI guy that knew it wasn't found, wasn't discovered.
Yeah, where were you when I was writing this? To get a better look at the space, it's similar to an X-ray for your bones. In the future, they plan to explore it using an inflatable blimp-style robot that can enter the otherwise inaccessible chamber through a tiny hole in the wall. So they're going to be doing all kinds of things using technology that's non-destructive. Because the one thing you have to think about when you're excavating, the main thing archaeologists themselves complain about it is the fact that they're destroying the site to get at what's underneath. And if they can start doing things, now we have ground penetrating radar, which works very well. It does work well. We've seen there are all kinds of things under where Stonehenge is. We use it a lot. And now we have this kind of thing, and it's just, to me, it's amazing. They're going to be using drones. They're going to be using these little robots. That little robot's going through the catacombs right now, looking, no ladders, no digging, and no damage. So the future of archaeology, it's going to be expensive, but the likelihood is they're going to be sharing it with other disciplines in order to afford it.
Well, you've got the satellites too that have been
Yes, the lady, Sarah Parsak, who does the satellite work, yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, so this is the future of archaeology. I think there is a future for archaeology, but I think it's going to be expensive. There's not going to be trowels so much anymore as it is going to be a LiDAR flyover, or now they have drones small enough to do it, and it's far less expensive than hiring a plane and a pilot. So even though it's going to be expensive, the cost of things are dropping radically. And we'll talk about that next time.
What is LiDAR? It says,
LiDAR is light. I always have to look it up again. Light. It's like a laser, and it runs really fast. It sends like pulses, many per second, so that it picks up a picture. It's light that's being used to make a picture. It can see through jungle canopy to what's built underneath, because many Mayan cities are under jungle canopies, and you can't see them. You can't see how big they are or were.
it's a version of radar.
It's shorter wavelength than radar.
Yeah, it's shorter. He says shorter wavelength than radar. It's a laser. It's part of the laser family.
All right.
And see, if you're going to ask these questions, you have to send them to me ahead of time, so I can look. I always have to look up what LiDAR is. Okay, that's it for today.